His arm tightened around her throat, a python of muscle cutting off her air. The colossal karate champion, Kenji the Oni Tanaka, grinned cruelly as the life drained from the young woman's eyes, her struggles weakening with each passing second. The crowd's roar of excitement had curdled into a collective gasp of horror. He didn't know this girl was the granddaughter of a legend, but the quiet, 60-year-old man watching from the shadows did. Kenji squeezed harder, a final, arrogant show of force. But then a single, deliberate footstep echoed from the side of the ring. Before I tell you whose footstep that was and show you the devastating justice that followed, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The arena lights blazed down on the center ring, illuminating a sea of faces roaring with anticipation. The air in the monolithic stadium was electric, thick with the scent of popcorn and anticipation. Thousands of spectators filled the tiered seats, their faces illuminated by the dazzling, almost celestial glow of the spotlights converged on the ring. Banners bearing the insignias of various martial arts dojos hung like ancient war flags from the steel rafters. Every angle was covered by television cameras, their red lights blinking like predatory eyes, broadcasting the national championship event live to millions. At the heart of it all stood Kenji the Oni Tanaka. He was a mountain of a man, his custom GI pristine, the golden kanji for Oni, demon, stitched arrogantly on his back. He bathed in the crowd's adoration, raising his arms not in gratitude, but in declaration of his own supremacy. His record was a trail of broken bodies and shattered spirits. Kenji didn't just defeat his opponents, he systematically dismantled them, leaving them humiliated. Tonight was meant to be a simple exhibition match, a showcase of skill to inspire the next generation. But Kenji had twisted it into a platform for his ego. Instead of facing a worthy contemporary, he had demanded a sparring session with a promising newcomer. Her name was Maya, Steven Seagal's own granddaughter, though Kenji was oblivious to this critical fact. To him, she was just another stepping stone. Maya entered the ring with a quiet dignity that stood in stark contrast to Kenji's boisterous arrogance. Her white GI was slightly oversized, a symbol of her still-growing journey in the martial arts world. She bowed deeply, first to the roaring crowd, then to the judges, and finally to Kenji, her eyes filled with a mixture of nervous excitement and deep-seated respect for the art form. This was her first major public demonstration, a moment she and her grandfather had prepared for tirelessly. The crowd anticipated a light, technical exchange. They were wrong. From the first bell, Kenji's attacks were not sparring strikes. They were punishing blows. His kicks landed with sickening thuds, his punches designed to intimidate and inflict pain. Maya, trained by one of the greatest, moved with a surprising grace. She blocked with precision, her smaller frame absorbing the impacts as she sought an opening. She managed to land a clean, sharp block that momentarily staggered him, a testament to her training. The crowd murmured in appreciation. But this small success only served to ignite Kenji's fury. How dare this novice challenge him? His sneer deepened. Is that all the legend's bloodline has to offer? He snarled, loud enough for the ringside microphones to pick up. He swatted her next block aside with contemptuous ease, shoving her to the mat. The referee barked a warning. Keep it clean, Tanaka. Kenji ignored him. He hauled Maya to her feet only to slam her down again, laughing. The atmosphere in the arena began to shift. The initial excitement soured, replaced by a growing unease. The cheers became hesitant. From the shadows of a VIP section, Steven Seagal watched, his face an unreadable mask of stone. The pride he had felt watching his granddaughter step into the ring had frozen, hardening into something cold and dangerous. Then, in a terrifying blur of motion, Kenji saw his opening. He lunged, not with a fist, but with an open-handed grab, seizing Maya by the collar of her GI. His other arm snaked around her neck, locking her in a vicious chokehold. Maya's eyes went wide with shock and pain. Her hands clawed desperately at the vise around her neck, her legs kicking feebly against the mat. Gasps of horror rippled through the stands. Break it up. That's enough. Kenji, the referee yelled, rushing in to pry him off. But Kenji was immovable, his muscles tensed. He shoved the official away, his teeth bared in a cruel grin. This is a champion's ring, he roared. Weaklings don't belong here. Maya's face began to turn a deathly shade of blue. Her frantic movements slowed, her limbs grew heavy. Her eyelids fluttered, and then she went limp, her body collapsing like a puppet with its strings cut. Kenji held the choke for a second longer before contemptuously dropping her to the canvas. The arena erupted into a cacophony of boos and horrified screams as he raised his arms in a grotesque parody of victory. Chaos consumed the arena. Kenji Tanaka stood over Maya's still form, his chest puffed out, a conquering tyrant on a battlefield of his own making. Pathetic, he bellowed into the overhead microphone, his voice echoing with disdain. This is the fate of anyone who dares face me. Champion forever. The response from the thousands gathered was not applause, but a tidal wave of outrage. Boos thundered from every corner, a unified roar of disgust that finally seemed to penetrate his thick skull. His victorious grin faltered slightly, replaced by a confused scowl. Medics, who had been on standby, scrambled through the ropes, their faces grim as they knelt beside Maya, immediately checking for a pulse and strapping an oxygen mask to her face. The giant screens replayed the horrifying moment of her collapse, her limp frame a stark indictment of Kenji's brutality. But amidst the clamor and condemnation, a new presence made itself known. From the exclusive ringside seats, a figure emerged from the shadows. He was a tall man, moving not with the frantic energy of the medics, but with a calm, deliberate purpose that seemed to bend the chaos around him. He was 60 years old, dressed in a simple, elegant black silk jacket, but he moved with the lethal grace of a panther. As he approached the ring, the crowd instinctively parted, a hush falling over those nearest to him. The spotlight, as if drawn by a magnetic force, swung away from Kenji and illuminated the newcomer's face. A collective gasp swept the arena, quickly followed by a surge of disbelief and then explosive cheers. It was Steven Seagal, the legend himself. He had been there as a guest of honor, but more importantly, as a grandfather watching his granddaughter's debut. The handkerchief his wife had given him for good luck was now a crumpled ball in his white-knuckled fist. He didn't climb the steps. He vaulted over the top rope in one fluid motion, landing softly on the mat, his boots making a sound like a gavel striking wood. The crowd's roar intensified, a mixture of shock and fervent hope. The referee's pale face was awash with relief. Kenji turned, his arrogance finally cracking as he recognized the icon standing before him. "What are you doing here, old man?" he stammered, trying to reclaim his dominance. Seagal's voice, when it came, was low and steady, yet it carried across the entire arena, cutting through the noise like a razor. "You put your hands on my granddaughter," he stated, each word dripping with ice. "You turned a demonstration of honor into a display of cowardice." He took another slow, deliberate step forward, his sheer presence making him seem to tower over the younger, larger champion. "And now," he finished, his eyes locking onto Kenji's, "you will face a consequence." The crowd erupted. The chant began, a low rumble that grew into a deafening roar. "Seagal! Seagal! Seagal!" Phones were raised high, recording the impossible moment. Kenji Tanaka, for the first time in his professional life, felt the cold tendrils of fear snake around his heart. He tried to force a smirk. "You think you scare me? I'm a champion. You're a relic." Steven simply tilted his head, his expression unchanging. "Show me," he commanded, driven by a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. The timekeeper, who had been watching with trembling hands, slammed his palm down on the bell. The sound pierced the air. The unofficial match had begun. Spitting a curse, Kenji charged, launching himself into a powerful spinning kick, a move that had ended dozens of fights. It was a blur of speed and force. But Seagal didn't even flinch. He shifted his weight, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, and the kick sliced harmlessly through the air where he had been a millisecond before. Before Kenji could retract his leg, Seagal's hand shot out, seizing his ankle in an iron grip. With a simple, devastatingly effective twist of his wrist, he upended the champion, sending him crashing to the mat with a jarring thud. The arena exploded in a symphony of cheers and stunned gasps. Kenji scrambled back to his feet, his face a mask of pure fury and disbelief. "Lucky shot," Kenji spat, his voice a venomous hiss as he clambered to his feet. The fall had hurt his pride more than his body, and the humiliation fueled a fresh wave of rage. He saw the faint, almost imperceptible shake of Steven Seagal's head. "There is no such thing as luck in here," Seagal's voice rumbled, a calm counterpoint to Kenji's fury. "Only cause and effect." Enraged, Kenji lunged forward again, abandoning technique for brute force. He unleashed a furious barrage of punches, his fists flying like pistons, each strike carrying the brutal power that had made him a champion. The blows were a whirlwind of violence, aimed to overwhelm and crush the older man. But it was like punching a wall of water. Seagal's movements were fluid, economical. His arms flowed in graceful, circular arcs, deflecting, parrying, and redirecting every single punch with minimal effort. The crowd watched, mesmerized. It wasn't a fight, it was a masterclass. Then, with a speed that defied his age, Seagal countered. As Kenji overextended on a wild hook, Seagal's hand shot forward, not as a fist, but as an open palm. It connected with Kenji's chest with a sound that echoed through the silent arena like a whip crack. The force wasn't explosive, but deep and penetrating. Kenji staggered backward, the air driven from his lungs in a wheezing gasp. He clutched his chest, his eyes wide with shock. Seagal advanced, his steps slow and measured, a predator closing in. "You choked her," he said, his voice low but carrying an immense weight. "You did it because she was smaller. Because you thought it made you look strong." Kenji snarled, forcing himself to stand upright. "I am strong," he roared and threw another kick, this one aimed high at Seagal's head. Seagal caught the leg mid-flight, his grip like a steel clamp on Kenji's ankle. With a terrifyingly precise twist of his wrist and elbow, he applied a joint lock. A sharp cry of agony escaped Kenji's lips. Seagal shoved him back, not violently, but with a firm, controlling force that sent him tumbling across the mat once more. The crowd's chant grew louder, more rhythmic. "Seagal! Seagal! Seagal!" They stomped their feet, the sound like a war drum. Kenji rose slower this time. The sweat pouring down his face was no longer from exertion, but from fear. His arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered look. Seagal circled him, his calm demeanor more intimidating than any war cry. "Strong men don't harm the defenseless," he continued his lesson, his voice cutting through the din. "Strong men protect them." That is the way. Fueled by a final, desperate surge of pride, Kenji shouted in rage and lunged, trying to tackle Seagal to the ground. It was a clumsy, desperate move. Seagal sidestepped effortlessly, and as Kenji barreled past, his hand chopped down on the back of Kenji's neck. The champion's legs buckled, and he crashed to his knees, dazed and disoriented. Before he could fall completely, Seagal grabbed the front of his GI, yanking him upright until they were face to face. The entire arena leaned forward, a collective holding a breath. "Apologize to her," Seagal's voice boomed. "Right now." Kenji, gasping for air, shook his head, his pride clinging to its last threads. "Nev," Seagal's hand snapped. Not a punch, but a jarring slap that sent Kenji sprawling back to the mat. The crowd roared its approval. "Apologize," Seagal repeated, his voice as sharp and unyielding as steel. The medics at ringside watched, their hands ready, but their faces showing a grim satisfaction. This wasn't a match anymore, it was a reckoning. Seagal lifted him again, his grip of ice. "You thought the cameras would make you famous. They will," he said, his eyes burning with cold fire. "But not for the reasons you wanted." In a swift, horrifyingly familiar motion, he spun Kenji around and locked him in the very same chokehold the champion had used on Maya. A gasp ripped through the audience at the bitter irony. Kenji's eyes bulged, pure panic flashing across his face as he clawed at Seagal's arm, his own body now thrashing in helpless terror. "Do you feel it now?" Seagal's voice thundered. "The fear? The helplessness? That's the gift you gave my granddaughter." Kenji's pride finally shattered into a million pieces. He slapped the mat frantically, his muffled cries barely audible. I'm sorry. Seagal held it for another second before releasing him. Kenji collapsed in a heap, coughing violently, gasping for the precious air he had so cruelly denied another. As Steven Seagal stood tall over the broken, gasping form of Kenji Tanaka, the arena shook from the thunderous ovation. For most, this utter humiliation would have been the end. But Kenji's arrogance was a deep, malignant cancer. Even in defeat, with his body aching and his spirit crushed, a final ember of defiance flickered within him. Slowly, shakily, he pushed himself to his knees. A trickle of blood ran from the corner of his mouth, mingling with the sweat on his chin. The crowd jeered, shouting for him to stay down, but his eyes, when they met Seagal's, burned with a renewed, pathetic fury. He spat on the mat. "This isn't over," he rasped, his voice a broken whisper of its former roar. "I am the champion." Seagal looked down at him, not with anger, but with something akin to pity. "The title is meaningless when the honor is gone," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Don't force me to take what little you have left." But Kenji wasn't listening. With a final, guttural roar, he lunged from his knees, a wild, desperate haymaker aimed at Seagal's head. It was a sloppy, telegraphed attack fueled by nothing but shame. Against a master, it was suicide. Seagal moved with the fluidity of water, sidestepping the punch with almost casual ease. His forearm deflected the strike, and in the same continuous motion, he caught Kenji's arm. With terrifying precision, he spun Kenji around and twisted the limb into a devastating arm lock. Kenji screamed a raw, high-pitched sound of agony as he was forced back down, first to one knee, then flat onto his stomach. The referee flinched, but knew better than to intervene. This was the final, brutal punctuation mark on the lesson. Seagal leaned down, his voice a deadly calm whisper right next to Kenji's ear. "Say it. Tell everyone what you really are." I. Kenji choked on the words, his pride wrestling with the searing pain. Seagal applied a fraction more pressure. A gut-wrenching crack echoed faintly. "Say it," Kenji screamed, his voice breaking into a sob. "I lost. I'm nothing. The confession, amplified by the ringside mics, hung in the air for a moment before the arena exploded. The cheers were deafening, a cathartic release of a crowd that had witnessed justice delivered in its most raw and visceral form. Seagal finally released him, and Kenji collapsed, curling into a fetal position, his body trembling with sobs of pain and humiliation. Seagal turned his back on the broken man. His massive frame commanded absolute silence as he walked toward the edge of the ring, where Maya was now sitting up on a stretcher, the oxygen mask removed, her dazed eyes watching the scene unfold. He knelt beside her, placing a large, gentle hand on her shoulder. Her eyes, though still hazy, filled with tears of relief when she saw him. "Grandpa," she whispered. "You're safe now," he murmured, his voice stripped of its earlier menace, filled only with the warmth of a loving grandfather. She nodded weakly. "Thank you." Steven rose and turned to face the crowd one last time. He pointed not at the vanquished Kenji, but toward his granddaughter. His voice boomed through the microphone system, clear and powerful. "This is why we train. This is what martial arts is for. Not to humiliate, not to break the weak for our own pride, but to defend, to honor, to protect." The crowd erupted again, the chant of Seagal. Seagal, rising louder than ever before. Phones recorded every immortal second. As Kenji was finally helped away by officials, his career and name forever tarnished, Steven Seagal helped his granddaughter to her feet and left the ring, the roar of the crowd following him like thunder rolling across the earth. Tonight, under the glare of the arena lights, we witnessed more than just an unsanctioned fight. It was a visceral lesson on an eternal truth, that true strength, the kind that endures, is rooted in humility and the will to protect. Arrogance, built on the humiliation of others, is nothing but a fragile house of cards, destined to collapse spectacularly the moment it faces a genuine force of honor. Have you ever witnessed someone in a position of power abuse it so blatantly? What would you have done if you were in that crowd, watching Maya lose consciousness? In a world that so often celebrates victory at any cost, do you think true honor, the kind Steven Seagal demonstrated, can ever truly be defeated? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story about justice and honor resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about legends standing up for what's right. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that bullies eventually always face a reckoning. We read every single comment. More stories about unlikely heroes and justice served are waiting on your screen. Watch those next. And we'll see you tomorrow with a brand new story about a quiet veteran who stood up to an entire biker gang. See you then.